You graduated into one recession. Then you lived through five more. You entered the workforce in 2000, 2001, 2002, 2003. The exact years the dot-com floor collapsed and took the job market with it. You bought your first home between 2004 and 2010. The exact window that became the worst housing correction in a generation. You started building retirement savings in 2005, 2006, 2007. The 3 years immediately before 2008 wiped a significant portion of what you had managed to accumulate. You did not make bad decisions. You made normal decisions at abnormal times. And the conversation around you, in the financial press, in the generational debate, in the quiet arithmetic of your own accounts at the end of each month, has consistently treated this as evidence of something you did wrong. This video is not going to tell you everything is fine. It is not. It is going to tell you what specifically happened, documented, sequenced, named, and why the timing of every major financial event in the past 25 years landed on this exact 4-year birth window at precisely the worst possible moment each time. Think about what your financial timeline actually looked like. You finished your education somewhere between 2000 and 2004. The advice going in was straightforward. Get the degree, enter the workforce, build the career. The sequence was clear, the timing made sense on paper, and the generation just ahead of you, people born a few years earlier, had done exactly this, and it had worked for them. They graduated in 1997, 1998, 1999. The economy was in the middle of the longest sustained expansion in modern history. Jobs were available. Salaries were rising. The dot-com sector was creating wealth at a pace that felt like a permanent new reality. You graduated in 2001, 2002, 2003. The floor had come out of that same sector the year before you arrived. The companies that had been hiring aggressively were laying off aggressively. The entry-level positions that your degree was supposed to open had contracted sharply. The same degree, the same qualifications, the same effort, different year, completely different outcome. You did not underperform. You arrived at the wrong moment of a cycle you had no control over. Then, when the job market stabilized and you began to build a career that was supposed to lead to house, you bought the house. You bought it somewhere between 2004 and 2010, when you were finally earning enough, finally stable enough, finally in the position the sequence required, and the market corrected underneath you. And then came 2008, and the retirement savings you had been building since you could afford to, which was later than it should have been, because the career started late, because the first job came late, because the degree landed in the wrong year, took a hit you had done nothing to deserve and spent years recovering from. That is 3 separate events, each one arriving at the precise wrong moment for the specific 4-year birth window. And the question underneath all of it is the same question. Was this me? Or was this the timing? Here is what the financial conversation almost never says plainly. The birth window of 1978 to 1982 was positioned, through no choice of its own, to take the maximum damage from every major economic disruption of the past 25 years. Not because of decisions made inside the disruptions, because of when the disruptions hit relative to the specific financial lifecycle stage this cohort was in at each moment. The financial lifecycle has predictable stages. You enter the workforce. You build early career stability. You make the first major purchase, typically housing. You begin serious wealth accumulation. You approach retirement. For the generation born 1978 to 1982, every one of these stages coincided with the worst economic conditions available in the modern era for that specific stage. Workforce entry, dot-com collapse of 2000 to 2002, early career building, post-September 11 economic contraction of 2001 to 2003, first housing purchase, the peak of the housing bubble, 2004 to 2007, and the crash that followed, primary wealth accumulation, the 2008 financial crisis, the worst since the Great Depression, mid-career stability, a decade of suppressed wage growth, 2009 to 2019, approach to retirement, pandemic economic disruption, followed by inflation surging 2022 to 2024. That is not bad luck distributed randomly. That is a specific 4-year birth window hitting every stage of the financial life cycle at the single worst available moment within each cycle. The hidden enemy is not your financial behavior. It is a specific intersection of your birth year and the timing of 6 consecutive economic disruptions, each one arriving precisely when this cohort was at its most financially vulnerable stage. And here is what that intersection has been doing to this generation's sense of financial identity for the past 20 years. The graduation ceremony. You sat through it. The speeches about the future, the handshakes, the photographs, the specific promise that the degree you had earned was the beginning of something. You sent out the applications. The rejection rate was higher than anyone had told you to expect. The positions that existed were fewer than the year before. The internships that were supposed to lead to roles had been quietly eliminated when the budgets contracted. You figured it out. You found something. But it was not the thing the degree was supposed to deliver, and you knew it, and you carried that knowledge quietly forward. The housing decision. At some point, maybe 2005, maybe 2007, maybe 2009, the calculation said it was time. The rent was climbing. The mortgage advisor said you qualified. The financial logic was sound. Renting was dead money. Housing values only go one way over time. Every piece of advice pointed to the same conclusion. And then the market did what nobody had predicted it would do. And the house you had bought as a foundation of the next phase became an asset worth less than what you owed, in some cases significantly less. And you kept paying a mortgage on something that was technically a loss while the banks that had generated the problem received public money to remain solvent. The 2008 account check. You had been contributing consistently, not aggressively. You could not afford aggressive. The early career years had not allowed for it, but consistently. And then one morning the number was different, significantly different, and you were told not to panic. And you did not panic. And you held on. And you recovered, mostly, but the years of recovery were years that were supposed to be building, not repairing. The career pivot nobody scheduled. At some point in the 2010s, the stable structure you had built your plan around restructured. The role, the industry, the employer, something changed. And you adapted, because that is what this generation does. But the adaptation costs seniority, costs continuity, costs a specific kind of security that requires years to rebuild. Every one of these is the same structural event at its core, a normal financial decision arriving at the worst possible moment of an economic cycle. Not bad judgment, wrong timing. And the cost of this sequence, the real cost, is not only financial. Here is what happens inside a person who does everything correctly and is still punished by the timing. At first, it is recalibration. You adjust the expectation. You absorb the setback and reorient. You are resilient. This generation is specifically and demonstrably resilient. And resilience is exactly what the situation requires. But resilience has a cost. Every recalibration uses the same energy that was supposed to be directed forward. Every time the goal shifts, you spend internal resources, resetting rather than advancing. And over 5 separate resets, over 25 years of absorbing and recovering and absorbing again, something begins to form underneath the resilience. A question that will not quite go away. A low-frequency background doubt that the effort is not actually connected to the outcome in the way the original plan assumed. This is not weakness. This is the nervous system accurately updating its model based on the evidence that has been given. When effort produces outcome reliably, the brain maintains investment in effort. When effort produces outcome unreliably, when the same effort leads to completely different results depending on factors outside your control, the brain begins to protect its motivational resources. The exhaustion you feel about the financial future is not a character deficiency. It is a rational nervous system response to irrational timing. But here is where the whole story changes. Because the reason this happened has a number, a precise, documentable number that changes how this should be classified. The common framing positions of financial difficulties of this generation as the result of individual choices, spending patterns, saving discipline, financial literacy, the particular decisions made at each stage. That framing cannot explain the data. Research on cohort financial outcomes, studies that track entire birth year groups across their full financial life cycles, consistently shows that the 1978 to 1982 birth window has the lowest median wealth accumulation of any four-year cohort born in the 20th century, when adjusted for age and education level. Not slightly lower, significantly lower. And the explanation is not spending behavior. The explanation is life cycle stage timing. The generation born just before this window, 1974 to 1977, entered the workforce before the dot-com collapse and built 2 to 4 years of career stability before the disruptions began. They bought houses before the peak in many cases. They had longer pre-2008 accumulation windows. The generation born just after this window, 1983 to 1987, was still in education during the worst of the dot-com collapse. They entered a recovering workforce. Their housing entry, while still difficult, had more varied timing relative to the peak and correction. The 1978 to 1982 window hit every stage at the worst available moment. This is not a story about what you did with what you had. This is a story about what the economy did to a four-year birth window that happened to be positioned at every major financial decision point at the same time as every major economic disruption. The receipt of 25 years of wrong timing does not look like failure. It looks exactly like what your account balance shows. The brain has a specific mechanism for processing repeated goal blockage. Researchers call it learned helplessness, though as discussed in a previous video, the name misleads. It is not helplessness. It is accuracy. When the evidence consistently shows that the connection between effort and outcome is unreliable, not because effort is insufficient, but because external conditions keep disrupting the outcome, the brain begins to update its predictions. It reduces investment in long-term goals that the evidence suggests are unstable. It shifts attention towards shorter-term, more controllable outcomes. It becomes, in a measurable and documented way, this shift is not a failure character. It is a documented neurological response to documented conditions. For the 1978 to 1982 cohort, this neurological shift has been building across 6 separate disruption events spanning 25 years. The brain that has recalibrated after the dot-com collapse, then after 2008, then after the career restructuring, then after the pandemic, then after inflation, is a brain that has been given an enormous amount of evidence that the future is less predictable than the original plan assumed. The physical costs are real. Chronic goal blockage is associated with elevated baseline cortisol, reduced sleep quality, and a specific kind of background anxiety that does not have a single identifiable source, but feels like a permanent low-level weather system. The antidote, and there is one, is not optimism. It is new evidence. Specific, genuine, undeniable evidence that action can produce outcome in some domain, not the block domain necessarily. Any domain. The brain rebuilds trust in effort-outcome connection through small, consistent wins that it can verify directly. The title asks about the psychology of people born 1978 to 1982. Here is a complete answer. You are the most precisely timed economic misfortune of any birth window in the modern era. Not the most unfortunate generation overall. Other generations have faced war, famine, genuine civilizational collapse. But in the specific context of late 20th century Western economic life, no four-year birth window was positioned to absorb maximum damage from every available disruption at every available life cycle stage the way the 1978 to 1982 window was. The graduation year was wrong. The housing timing was wrong. The accumulation start was wrong. The recovery period was consumed by more disruption. The approach to retirement is happening during the highest inflation environment in 40 years. This is documented. This is the cohort data. This is not a story you constructed to explain your circumstances. It is a statistical reality of what happened to an entire birth window. You did not choose these years. You did not choose the timing of the disruptions. You made normal financial decisions during abnormal conditions, and the abnormal conditions won. And a generation that absorbed 6 economic disruptions across 25 years and is still here, still working, still adapting, still oriented toward a future despite abundant evidence that the future moves its goalposts. That generation did something that is genuinely, documentably remarkable. Not what you planned to do, what you actually did. You were born 4 years too late for the last sustained boom. 4 years too early for the full recovery. The timing was not yours to choose. The response was, every generation that ever arrived at a disrupted world has faced the same question. Not why did this happen to me? The answer to that is timing, which is not a moral category. But what do I do now with what I have on ground that kept shifting underneath me for 25 years? You already know the answer. You have been answering it since 2001. The generation that graduated into the wrong year has been finding the way forward ever since. It has not stopped yet. What year did you graduate? And what did the job market look like the month you arrived? One sentence. I want to see how many of us walked out into the same thing. Subscribe for a new video every week. The channel is building a complete picture of every generation that has been underdescribed. The next one is coming.